The brutal Alaskan winter of 1888 had already claimed its share of lives, but for Elara and her family, the true horror was yet to unfold. They were new to the rugged Chugach Mountains, a small, tight-knit clan lured by the promise of gold and a fresh start far from the stifling grip of civilization. Her father, Thomas, a man of quiet determination and powerful hands, had built their cabin with his own sweat and ingenuity, a sturdy refuge against the biting winds and relentless snows. Her mother, Sarah, a gentle soul with surprising resilience, had made it a true home, filling it with warmth, the comforting scent of pine, and the soft murmur of lullabies for Elara and her younger brother, Finn, who was barely 5. That fateful day began like any other, deceptively calm. A fresh blanket of snow had fallen overnight, silencing the vast forest and painting the world in pristine white, a deceptive shroud of peace. Elara, then a spirited 12-year-old with braids that bounced as she moved, was helping her father clear the path to their small trapping shed, the rhythmic scrape of their shovels the only sound. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the valley, deep and unsettling. It started as a distant growl, a hungry beast awakening in the mountain's belly, then swiftly escalated into a thunderous roar that swallowed all other sound, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. Her father, his face draining of color, shoved her violently towards the cabin, his voice raw with terror as he screamed her mother's name. "Sarah, inside, now!" But it was too late. The mountain, a silent, ancient giant for centuries, had decided to speak, and its voice was a colossal wall of churning snow, ice, and splintered trees, hurtling down with unimaginable force. Elara remembered the blinding white, the crushing, inescapable weight, the desperate clawing sensation as she fought for a single gasp of air. Then, only an impenetrable darkness and the suffocating pressure of a world turned utterly upside down. The cold bit into her, a searing pain before numbness took hold. If you're gripped by Elara's story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single chapter of her harrowing journey. Days later, or perhaps it was only hours, time had lost all meaning, dissolving into a timeless void. Elias Thorne, a weathered mountaineer with eyes that had seen too much of Alaska's harsh beauty and even harsher brutality, was on his solitary trek through the Chugach Pass. His face was a roadmap of lines etched by sun, wind, and frost. He had a sixth sense for the mountain's moods, a deep, almost instinctual respect, born of years spent navigating its treacherous, unpredictable terrain. He'd seen the recent avalanche scars, stark, gaping gashes across the landscape, looking like fresh wounds, and was carefully picking his way through the immense, jumbled debris field when something impossibly small caught his discerning eye. Just barely protruding from the glistening packed snow, a tiny gloved hand. It was pale, delicate, almost translucent against the stark white, yet strangely defiant in its utter stillness. Elias, a man hardened by decades of solitude and the brutal necessities of survival, felt a sharp, unexpected pang deep in his chest. He knew the odds were astronomically against any survivor in such a massive, crushing slide, especially after what looked like days of being buried. But something, a flicker of stubborn hope, or perhaps just an ingrained mountaineer's intuition, a whisper of life amidst the desolation, urged him on. He dropped his pack and began to dig, frantically at first, his breath misting in the frigid air, then with the methodical, efficient precision of someone who understood the brutal mechanics of snow and ice. His hands, calloused and strong as leather, worked tirelessly, each shovelful of heavy snow a silent prayer. The cold bit at his ungloved skin, but he ignored it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of agonizing labor, he unearthed a small, frozen body. It was Elara, Her face was deathly pale, a shocking white against the blue of her lips, but as Elias gently brushed away the fine snow from her face, he saw the faint, almost imperceptible mist of her breath, a ghost of vapor in the cold air. She was barely alive, her small body ravaged by severe hypothermia, her life clinging by the thinnest thread, but against all odds, she was alive. The recovery was long and agonizing, a brutal test of endurance for both rescuer and rescued. Elias carried her back to his remote, sturdy cabin, a simple structure of logs and animal hides that was more a sanctuary than a dwelling. He nursed her with his meager but well-chosen supplies and his formidable self-taught knowledge of wilderness medicine, skills honed over years of patching himself and others up in the unforgiving wild. For days, Elara drifted in and out of consciousness, caught in a terrifying limbo between nightmare and reality. She was haunted by fragmented, chilling nightmares of the Avalanche, the terrifying, deafening roar, her family's desperate, fading cries, and the suffocating darkness. When she finally awoke fully, her eyes fluttering open to the dim light of Elias's cabin, the world was a blur of searing pain and a profound, aching, desolate emptiness that settled deep in her bones. "My family," she whispered, her voice a reedy, barely audible whisper, raw from disuse. Her eyes, still unfocused, searched Elias's stoic, weathered face for an answer, a flicker of hope. He didn't need to speak. The deep, unspeakable sorrow in his eyes, the slight, almost imperceptible tremble of his hand as he offered her a crude wooden cup of broth, told her everything she dreaded to know. The Avalanche had taken them all. Her father, Thomas, strong and protective. Her mother, Sarah, gentle and loving. Her little brother, Finn, full of bright, innocent laughter, all swept away by the mountain's indifferent, crushing fury. Only she remained, a fragile, shivering testament to a devastating, absolute loss. The profound silence in Elias's cabin, broken only by the comforting crackle of the fireplace and the mournful, howling lament of the wind outside, amplified her solitude, making her feel utterly, terrifyingly alone. She closed her eyes, trying desperately to block out the searing image of the crushing snow, but it was etched into her mind, a permanent scar. Elias watched her with a quiet intensity, a man accustomed to the raw, visceral grief that the wilderness often inflicted. He knew that healing in these parts was a slow, arduous, almost geological process, much like carving a path through a relentless blizzard. He simply continued to provide warmth from the fire, nourishing food, and the silent, unspoken understanding that only another solitary soul, deeply familiar with loss and the vastness of the wild, could offer. The following months were a testament to Elara's burgeoning spirit and Elias's quiet, unwavering strength. He was a man of few words, his sentences sparse and to the point, but his actions spoke volumes, resonating with a deep, practical wisdom. He taught her to hunt with a rudimentary bow and arrow, to set ingenious traps for small game, and to read the myriad subtle signs of the wilderness. How to track, how to predict weather changes by the wind's scent, skills absolutely essential for survival in this unforgiving land. He never pressed her to speak of her family, understanding intuitively that grief was a solitary, deeply personal journey, a landscape one had to traverse alone. But he was always there, a solid, silent, comforting presence, a steady anchor in her storm-tossed world. Elara learned to navigate not just the treacherous physical landscape of Alaska, but also the desolate, ravaged terrain of her own profound grief. She carried the immense weight of her family's loss every single day, a constant, dull ache deep in her heart, a phantom limb of sorrow. But paradoxically, she also carried their memory, their enduring love, and the fierce determination that had been a hallmark of her father, Thomas. The mountain that had taken so much from her also, unexpectedly, became her teacher, her solace, and, in a strange, transformative way, her new home. She became a true child of the Alaskan wilderness, forged by unimaginable tragedy, but irrevocably shaped by resilience, grit, and a nascent strength. Her hand, once barely visible, fragile and frozen in the snow, was now strong, calloused and capable, ready to face whatever the vast, beautiful and brutal land might throw her way. Elias, for his part, found an unexpected, quiet purpose in guiding her. He saw in Elara a reflection of the unyielding spirit of Alaska itself, wild, resilient, capable of enduring immense hardship and emerging stronger. He knew she would not just survive, but truly thrive. He meticulously taught her the difference between various animal tracks etched in the snow, how to expertly set a snare, and the most efficient way to gut a fish. He showed her how to build a life-saving fire in a driving snowstorm and how to find natural shelter when none seemed apparent. Each lesson was a vital thread, weaving her back into the intricate, resilient fabric of life in the wild. Don't miss the next chapter of Elara's incredible journey. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of strong, resilient story enthusiasts. As spring tentatively thawed the land, a slow, grudging surrender of winter's icy grip, revealing patches of dark brown earth beneath the melting snow, Elara felt a renewed surge of energy, a stirring of life within her. She and Elias ventured further into the vast, awakening mountains, exploring new trails and setting new traps, their rhythm in sync with the changing seasons. One blustery afternoon, while checking a trapline near a narrow, ice-carved gorge, Elara stumbled upon a painfully familiar landmark, a cluster of 3 ancient, gnarled pines that had stood like silent sentinels near their old cabin, a place she had tried to avoid in her mind. Her breath hitched, catching painfully in her throat. The sight brought a brutal rush of memories, vivid and raw, assaulting her senses. She could almost see her mother, Sarah, hanging laundry from a line strung between those very trees, the white sheets snapping in the wind. Her father, Thomas, would be nearby, splitting firewood, the rhythmic thud of his axe echoing through the still air. Finn, her little brother, with his bright, curious eyes, would chase after chattering squirrels, his innocent laughter echoing with pure joy. The air around her grew heavy, thick with the tangible ghosts of happier times, a suffocating weight of what once was. A profound, aching sorrow washed over her, an emptiness so vast and deep it threatened to swallow her whole, pulling her back into the darkness of that day. Elias, noticing her sudden stillness, her shoulders slumped, approached cautiously, his boots crunching softly on the slushy ground. He didn't need words to understand the source of her anguish. The desolation in her eyes, the way her small body trembled, spoke volumes. He placed a gentle, reassuring, calloused hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of tenderness from the stoic mountaineer. "This land holds many stories," he said, his voice softer than usual, a low rumble like distant thunder. "Some are of joy, some of sorrow, some of both intertwined. But they all make the mountain what it is, Elara. They are part of its soul." His words, simple as they were, offered a sliver of profound comfort, acknowledging her searing pain without demanding she articulate it, recognizing the deep roots of her grief. Elara nodded slowly, tears silently tracing hot paths down her dust-streaked, wind-chapped cheeks. She understood. The mountains were not just a physical landscape of rock and ice, but a living repository of memories, both breathtakingly beautiful and heartbreakingly painful. She was part of its story now, too. Her family's story, now inextricably woven into the fabric of this vast, indifferent, yet powerfully resonant land. Life with Elias was a stark existence, a daily, relentless battle against the unforgiving elements, but it was also a life of quiet lessons and a burgeoning, fierce self-reliance for Elara. One blustery afternoon, as the first signs of autumn chilled the air, A lone, stumbling figure appeared in their small, secluded clearing. It was a gaunt, desperate-looking prospector, his eyes wild with a peculiar light that spoke of gold fever, his clothes tattered and barely clinging to his emaciated frame. He was suffering from severe frostbite, his fingers and toes blackened, and was clearly on the very brink of collapse, his body swaying dangerously. Elias, ever the pragmatist, his gaze sharp and assessing, brought him inside without a word of hesitation, offering him precious food and the life-giving warmth of their hearth. Elara, though instinctively wary of strangers after so long in solitude, helped tend to his painful injuries, applying salves and bandages with careful hands. The prospector, who introduced himself as Silas, spoke in rambling, feverish bursts, his voice hoarse from exposure, recounting vivid tales of a fantastically rich vein of gold he'd found deep within a treacherous, unexplored section of the mountains. His words were a chaotic mix of delusion and desperation, painting a mesmerizing picture of untold wealth just beyond reach. A shimmering mirage. Elias listened impassively, his expression unreadable, having heard such fantastical tales many times before. He knew all too well that the mountains often played cruel, deceptive tricks on men's minds, especially those consumed by the insatiable hunger of greed. But Elara, despite her youth, felt a prickle of unease, a cold sensation crawling up her spine. There was something about Silas's intensity, his feverish, unwavering conviction, that struck a profoundly discordant note, a terrifying obsession. He spoke of the gold as if it were a sentient being, a siren beckoning him, luring him to his ultimate doom, oblivious to the dangers. Silas stayed for a few days, his physical health slowly mending under Elias's care, but his obsession with the phantom gold only deepened, becoming more entrenched with each passing hour. He tried desperately to convince Elias to join him, promising a fortune beyond their wildest dreams, a life of unimaginable luxury. Elias firmly refused, his years of harsh experience teaching him the brutal consequences of such reckless, gold-fueled pursuits. As Silas finally prepared to leave, still resolute in his singular quest for the elusive treasure, Elara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Alaskan air. She sensed a storm brewing, not of snow and ice, but of human ambition run wild, and the perilous, destructive path it often carved through men's souls. Weeks turned into a full month, and the unsettling memory of Silas and his gold-fueled madness faded into the background of their daily survival, becoming just another grim anecdote of the Alaskan wilderness. Then, a severe, unexpected blizzard hit, a punishing, relentless wall of snow and wind that pinned Elias and Elara in their cabin for days. The howling gale outside was a constant, mournful lament. When the storm finally broke, revealing a landscape utterly buried under an unprecedented, monstrous amount of fresh snow, they discovered something alarming. Their main trapline, their primary source of winter sustenance, had been completely destroyed, likely by the immense crushing snowdrifts and the powerful, relentless winds. Their winter provisions, already dwindling precariously, were now severely threatened, casting a long shadow of worry. "We need to find an alternative, and fast," Elias stated, his brow furrowed deeply with concern, his voice grave. "The game will be scarce with this much snow, driven deep into hiding, and our usual hunting grounds might be completely inaccessible for weeks, perhaps months." Elara, now almost 13, met his gaze with a maturity and steadfastness beyond her years, her face pale but resolute. "What do you propose?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor of fear in her stomach. Elias sighed, a deep, weary sound, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "There's a small, isolated valley, deep in the mountains, known for its strong beaver population. It's rich in game, a good source of pelts and meat. But it's a risky trek," he admitted, his eyes fixed on hers. through a narrow, treacherous pass that's notoriously prone to small, unpredictable slides this time of year. And, he added, his voice dropping, it's uncomfortably close to where Silas claimed his gold was. He hesitated, his eyes searching hers, measuring her resolve. It's dangerous, Elara, more dangerous than anything we've attempted. A flicker of raw fear, quickly and fiercely suppressed, crossed Elara's face. The very word avalanche still sent a visceral shiver down her spine, bringing back the icy terror of that day. Yet she understood the gravity of their desperate situation with chilling clarity. Survival demanded calculated risks, and sometimes desperate ones. "We have to," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "We can't just wait here and starve." Elias nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her courage, a quiet pride in her resilience. The next morning, under a sky still bruised with remnants of the monumental storm, they packed their essential gear, their shared determination a silent shield against the biting, pervasive cold. They knew the journey would be perilous, testing not just their physical limits and their accumulated skills, but also the invisible, strengthening bonds that had formed between them. The looming shadow of Silas's madness and his phantom gold, coupled with the fresh memory of the previous avalanche, weighed heavily, but the urgent, undeniable call of survival propelled them forward, deeper into the vast, unforgiving wilderness. If you're finding Elara's story compelling, please subscribe. Your support helps us tell more incredible tales of human resilience and the indomitable spirit of survival. The journey to the Beaver Valley was arduous, a relentless test of their endurance. The impossibly deep, unstable snow made every single step a grueling struggle, each footfall sinking deep into the cold embrace of the mountain. The air was thin and biting, scraping at their lungs with every breath. They navigated narrow, precarious ridges and steep, icy inclines, always mindful of the freshly fallen, unstable snowpack, listening intently for any ominous shifts. After 3 days of relentless, exhausting travel, pushing their bodies to their limits, they finally descended into the promised valley. It was indeed teeming with beaver activity, the dammed waters a vital lifeline in the frozen landscape. But as they approached the frozen river, a chilling sight greeted them, a stark, unwelcome reminder of the human cost of obsession. A makeshift camp, crudely constructed from scavenged branches and tattered canvas, lay half-buried in a snowdrift, a desolate testament to desperation. Tools, meager supplies, and discarded frozen food wrappers were scattered haphazardly, telltale signs of a frantic, disorganized existence. And then they saw him. Silas. He was alive, miraculously but barely. His body was gaunt to the point of emaciation, his face etched with a terrifying madness, and his eyes burned with a feverish, unnatural intensity, a disturbing, desperate light that spoke volumes of his shattered mind. He was still digging, relentlessly, furiously, at a frozen rock face, his breath coming in ragged gasps, muttering incoherently to himself about vast veins of gleaming gold just beyond his reach. "He's lost his mind," Elias whispered, his voice grim and low, a chilling confirmation of Elara's earlier fears. "Gold fever. It's consumed him entirely." Silas didn't seem to notice their arrival at first, lost in his private world of delusion. He clawed at the solid ice with frostbitten, blackened fingers, convinced he was on the very verge of uncovering an unimaginable fortune. As they tried to approach him cautiously, hoping to offer help, he suddenly whirled around, a pickaxe clutched tightly in his hand, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and burning with a paranoid frenzy. "Mine! It's all mine! You won't take it!" he shrieked, his voice raw, clearly believing they were there to steal his imagined precious treasure. Elias tried to reason with him, his voice calm and steady, to offer him food and the simple warmth of their fire. But Silas was far beyond rational thought. his mind shattered by hunger, cold, and a relentless obsession. His obsession had utterly consumed him, turning him into a dangerous, desperate, and tragically unpredictable man. Elara watched, a tight knot of cold fear tightening in her stomach. The wilderness held many obvious dangers: blizzards, avalanches, wild animals, but the most unpredictable, she was learning with a chilling certainty, were often human, driven to madness by their own internal demons. The situation with Silas quickly escalated from precarious to outright dangerous. His paranoia, fueled by prolonged exposure and his relentless obsession, made him utterly volatile and unpredictable. He lunged at Elias with the pickaxe again, its sharp point glinting dangerously, forcing them to retreat further into the swirling snow. They couldn't simply leave him to die, a slowly freezing, raving figure in the deepening snow, but his aggressive, irrational behavior made any attempt to help him incredibly perilous. A heavy, blinding snowfall began anew, quickly turning into a relentless whiteout, trapping them in the perilous valley with the deranged prospector, the visibility dropping to mere feet. As the blizzard raged around them, its furious winds whipping snow into a frenzy, Silas continued his frenzied, futile digging, his hoarse shouts echoing eerily through the swirling white, a haunting testament to his descent into madness. Elias and Elara huddled for what little shelter they could find behind a snow-laden rock, knowing that prolonged exposure to the elements in his current state would undoubtedly be fatal for Silas, but approaching him was tantamount to suicide. Elara, her mind racing despite the chilling cold and the rising fear, suddenly remembered Elias's stories of old trappers who, faced with similar desperate situations, would sometimes leave caches of food for lost or mad men, hoping it would be enough to bring them to their senses, or at least sustain them, until a chance for proper help arrived. "We can leave him food," she shouted over the howling, mournful wind, her voice strained but clear, "and then move to the higher ridge, find better shelter. He might calm down, or at least survive the night if he finds it." Elias considered it, his face grim, his eyes narrowed against the driving snow. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble against the elements and human madness, but it was their only viable option, a chance to alleviate their conscience without risking their own lives directly. They moved cautiously, their bodies hunched against the wind, staying carefully out of Silas's line of sight, and left a small, tightly bundled package of dried meat, a canvas wrapped around some fire-starting tools, and a small, sturdy water skin where he would eventually find them, a beacon of potential salvation. Then they began the arduous, dangerous climb to a small, sheltered alcove, higher on the ridge above, hoping to wait out both the ferocity of the storm and the tragic, unpredictable madness of Silas. The climb was treacherous, the deep, fresh snow incredibly unstable, threatening to give way with every step, but they pushed on, their very survival depending on it. The chilling screams of Silas, distorted and carried away by the relentless wind, slowly faded behind them, a haunting, indelible reminder of the razor-thin line between human ambition and utter, soul-destroying madness in the vast, indifferent Alaskan wild. The blizzard raged for another full day and a night, a relentless, deafening tempest that buried the valley under an even deeper, heavier blanket of snow, transforming the landscape into a pristine, silent, and deadly white expanse. When dawn finally broke, casting a pale, ethereal light over the frozen, muffled landscape, the silence was profound, almost deafening, broken only by the distant, lonely caw of a raven, a stark contrast to the previous day's chaos. From their sheltered, icy perch on the ridge, Elias and Elara looked down into the snow-filled valley below. Silas was gone. The makeshift camp was completely buried under a fresh, enormous drift, a faint, almost invisible mound in the vast whiteness, and there was absolutely no sign of movement near the rock face he had so desperately clawed at. Whether he had finally succumbed to the brutal cold and starvation, been silently buried by a minor, unseen slide, or simply wandered off deeper into the unforgiving wilderness in his madness, they could not tell. His desperate, all-consuming pursuit of gold had finally claimed him, swallowed by the indifferent, vast and ancient expanse of the mountains he had so foolishly sought to conquer, his ambitions melting into the snow. They spent the next few days in the valley, establishing their new trap line, working efficiently and silently, their movements practiced and synchronized. The abundance of beaver, though a stark, almost ironic contrast to Silas's tragic self-destructive fate, was a powerful reminder of the mountain's ability to provide, to sustain life, even as it demanded ultimate respect and humility from those who dared to live within its clutches. As they finally trekked back towards their own remote cabin, loaded with valuable pelts and a renewed, profound sense of purpose, Elara looked back one last time at the imposing, majestic peaks of the Chugach Mountains, their snow-capped summits piercing the sky. The grief for her family remained, a deep, unyielding current flowing beneath the surface of her life, a permanent part of her being. But it was no longer a consuming, paralyzing force. She had faced the untamed wild, wrestled with its brutal indifference and its breathtaking beauty, and in doing so had found within herself a strength she never knew existed, a resilience forged in the crucible of unimaginable loss. Elias, walking steadfastly beside her, was more than just a rescuer. He was a silent mentor, a rock-solid pillar of unwavering support who had helped her meticulously rebuild a life from the shattered fragments of tragedy. Elara knew her challenging journey in Alaska was far from over. The mountains would continue to challenge her, to test her resilience, to push her limits. But she was no longer a frightened, helpless child, barely visible and lost in a vast, crushing sea of snow. She was a survivor, hardened and transformed by the crucible of loss, and standing tall against the vast, unpredictable, and endlessly unfolding horizon of her new life, ready for whatever adventures, hardships, and quiet, hard-won victories the Alaskan wilderness had yet to offer her. Thank you for joining Elara on her incredible journey of survival and resilience. If you were moved by her story, please subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life narratives of extraordinary human spirit and the power of the natural world.